Well, you certainly don't go out any place less than dressed. Not these days. Can't let anybody mistake you for that broken, misused little girl, Eleanor Fagan. No. Let there be no confusion. Not in the audience or in your old man, in the maitre d' or the floor manager. The cops are the goddamn agents of the goddamn IRS. You always have your fur, present and correct, hanging off your shoulders just so. Take back your mink, take back your pearls. But you don't sing that song, it's not in your key. Let some other girl sing it. The type who gets a smile from a cop, even if she's crossing Broadway in her oldest Terraline house dress. You don't have that luxury. Besides, you love that mink. Makes the state of things clear. In fact, though many aren't hip to this yet, not only is there no more Eleonora, there isn't any Billy either. There is only Lady Day. Alligator bag, 3 rows of diamonds nice and thick on your wrist. Never mind that it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You boil an egg in twin set and pearls. They got you holed up in Newark for the length of this engagement. And one day the wife of the super says to you, "So you can't play New York no more, huh? Who cares? To me, you always look like Lady. She's Italian. She gets it. No judgment. She says, I look after you. I be your mother. God bless her, but your daughter days are done. And if a few sweet, clueless Bobby socks as happy as Sunday stop you on 110th to tell you how much they loved you at Carnegie Hall, how much they loved you on The Tonight Show, try your best not to look too bored. Take out your pearl-encrusted cigarette box and hand them a smoke. Girl, you must give away 20 smokes a day. You give it all away. It streams from you like rivers roll into the sea. Love, music, money, smokes. What you got, everybody wants. And most days you let them have it. Sometimes it's as much as you can do to keep a hold of your mink. It's not that you don't like other women exactly, it's only that you're wary. And they're wary of you right back. No surprise, really. Most of these girls live in a completely different world. You visited that world on occasion, but it's not home. You're soon back on the road. Meanwhile, they look at you and see that you're unattached. Even when you're hitched, they see you're floating. That no one tells you when to leave the club, and there's nobody crying in a cot waiting for you to pick them up and sing a lullaby. No, nobody tells you who to see or where to go, and if they do, you don't have to listen, even when you get a sock to the jaw. Now, the women you tend to meet, they don't know what to do with that. They don't know what to do with the God-blessed child, with the girl that's got her own, who can stay up drinking with the clarinet player till the newspaper boys hit the corners. And maybe one of these broads is married to that clarinet player. And maybe the two of them have a baby and a picket fence and all that jazz. So naturally, she's wary. You can understand that. Sure. And you've always been, well, what's the right term for it? A man's lady? Men are drawn to you, all kinds of men, and not just for the obvious. Even your best girlfriends are men, if you see what I mean. Yes, you got your little gang of dear boys who aren't so very different from you, despite appearances. They got nobody steady to go home to either. So if some lover man breaks your heart or your face, you can trust in your little gang to be there for you more often than not. Trust them to come round to wherever you're at, with cigarettes and alcohol, and quote Miss Crawford, and quote Miss Stanwyck, and make highballs, and tell you that you really ought to get a dog. Honey, you should get a dog. They never doubt your Lady Day. Matter of fact, they knew you were she before you did. You get a dog. Women are wary. Lover men come and go, mostly leave you waiting. And truth be told, even those dear boys who make the highballs have their own thing going on more often than not. But you're not afraid to look for love in all kinds of places. Once upon a time, there was that wild girl, Tallulah, plus a few other ladies back in the day. But there was no way to be in the world like that, not back then, or no way you could see. And anyhow, most of those ladies were crazier than a box of frogs. Nobody's perfect, which is another way of saying there's no escape from this world. And so sometimes on a Friday night after the singing is over and the clapping dies down, there's simply no one and nothing to be done. You fall back on yourself. Backstage empties out, but they still serving. You're not in the mood for conversation. Later, you'll open your vanity case and make a trip on the light fantastic. But right at this moment, you're grateful for your little dog. You did have a huge great dog a while back, but she was always knocking glasses off the side tables, and then she went and died on you, so now you got this tiny little angel. Peppy. A dog don't cheat. A dog don't lie. Dogs remind you of you. They give everything they've got. They're wide open to the world. It's a big risk. There are people out there who'll kick a little half-pint dog like Peppy just for something to do. And you know how that feels. This little dog and you, soulmates. Where you been all my life? He's like those dogs you read about that sit on their master's grave for years and years and years. Recently, you had a preview of this. You were up in the stratosphere with nobody at all, floating, almost right there with God. You were hanging off the pearly gates, and nobody and nothing could make you come back. Some fool slapped you. Some other fool sprayed seltzer in your face. Nothing. Then this little angel of a dog licked you right in your eye socket, and you came straight back to earth just to feel it. And 3 hours after that, you were on a stage, getting paid. Dogs are too good for this world. Maybe a lot of people wouldn't guess it, but you can be the most wonderful aunt, godmother, nursemaid when the mood takes you. You can spot a baby across a room and make it smile. That's a skill. Most people don't even try to develop it. People always telling these put-upon babies what to do, what to think, what to say, what to eat. But you don't ask anything at all from them, and that's your secret. You're one of the few who just like to make a baby smile. And they love you for it. Make no mistake, they adore you. And all things being equal, you'd stay longer if you could. You'd stay and play, but you've got bills to pay. Matter of fact, downstairs right this moment, there's 5 or 6 of these business-minded fellows. Some of them you know pretty well. Some you don't. Some you never saw before in your life. But they're all involved in your bills one way or another. And they say if you don't mind too much, they'd like to escort you to the club. It's only 10 blocks, but they'd like to walk you there. I guess somebody thinks you're not going to get there at all without these, now what would you call them? Chaperones. Guess somebody's worried. But with or without your chaperones, you'll get there. You always get there. And you're always on time. Except during those exceptions when exceptional things seem to happen which simply can't be helped. Anyway, once you open your mouth, all is forgiven. You even forgive yourself. Because you are exceptional. And so exceptions must be made. And isn't the point that whenever a lady turns up on stage, she's always right on time? Hair takes a while. Face takes longer. It's all work. It's all a kind of armor. You got skinny a while back, and some guys don't like it. One even told you got a face like an Egyptian death mask now. Well, good. You wear it. It's yours. Big red lips and now this new high ponytail bouncing around. The gardenias are done. The gardenias belong to Billy. And if somebody asks you where exactly this new long twist of hair comes from, you'll cut your eyes at whoever's doing the asking and say, well, I wear it, so I guess it's mine. It's my hair on my goddamn head. It's arranged just so around my beautiful mask. Take a good look. Because you know they're all looking right at it as you sing. You place it deliberately in the spotlight, your death mask. Because you know they can't help but seek your soul in the face. It's their instinct to look for it there. You paint the face as protection. You draw the eyebrows, define the lips. It's the border between them and you. Otherwise, everybody in the place would think they had permission to leap right down your throat and eat your heart out. People ask, what's it like standing up there? It's like eating your own heart out. It's like there's nobody out there in the dark at all. All the downtown collectors and the white ladies in their own fancy furs love to talk about your phrasing. It's the fashion to talk about your phrasing. But what sounds like a revolution to others is simple common sense to you. All respect to Ella. All respect to Sarah. But when those gals open their mouths to sing, well, to you it's like someone just opened a brand new Frigidaire. A chill comes over you. And you just can't do it like that. Won't. It's obvious to you that a voice has the same work to do, musically speaking, as the sax or the trumpet or the piano. A voice has got to feel its way in. Who the hell doesn't know that? Yet somehow these people don't act like they know it. They always seem surprised. They sit in the dark, drinking martinis in their mink, in their tux. People are idiots. You wear pearls and you throw them before swine, more or less. Depends what pearls, though, and what swine. Not everybody, for example, is going to get strange fruit. Not every night. They've got to be deserving. A word that means a different thing depending on the night. You told somebody once, I only do it for people who might understand and appreciate it. This is not a June Moon croon tune. This song tells a story about pain and heartache. 300 years of heartache. You've got to turn each room you play into a kind of church in order to accommodate that much pain. Yet people shout their requests from their tables like you're a goddamn jukebox. People are idiots. You never sing anything after Strange Fruit either. That's the last song no matter what. And sometimes, if you're high and the front row look rich and stupid and dull, that's liable to be your only song. And they'll be thankful for it, even though it's not easy for them to listen to and not easy for you to sing. When you sing it, you have been described as punishing. You have been described as relentless. Well, you're not done with that song till you're done with it. You will never be done with it. It'll be done with you first. In the end, people don't want to hear about dogs and babies and feeling your way into a phrase or eating your heart out. People want to hear about you as you appear in these songs. They never want to know about the surprise you feel in yourself, the sense of being directed by God, when something in the modulation of your throat leaps up like a kid reaching for a rising balloon, except most kids miss while you catch it. Yes, you catch it almost without expecting to, landing on an incidental note, a perfect addition, one you never put in that phrase before and never heard anyone else do, and yet you can hear at once that it is perfection. Perfection. It has the sound of something totally inevitable. It's better than Porter. It's better than Gershwin. In a moment, you have written over their original versions finally and completely. No, they never ask you about that. They want the cold, hard facts. They ask dull questions about the songs, about which man goes with which song in your mind. And if they're a little more serious, they might ask about Armstrong or Basie or Lester. If they sneaky with no manners, they'll want to know if Chasing the Drink or The Dragon made singing those songs harder or sweeter. They'll want to know about your run-ins with the federal government of these United States. They'll want to know if you hated or loved the people in your audience, the people who paid your wages, stole your wages, arrested you once for fraternizing with a white man, jailed you for hooking, jailed you for being, and raided your hospital room right at the end as you lay conversing with God. They are always very interested to hear that you don't read music. Once you almost said to a sneaky fellow from the Daily News who was inquiring, you almost turned to him and said, "Motherfucker, I am music." But a lady does not speak like that, however, and so you did not. The lazy river. We're submerged. All of us. You, me, the children, our friends, their children, everybody else. Sometimes we get out, for lunch, to read or to tan, never for very long. Then we all climb back into the metaphor. The lazy river is a circle, it is wet, it has an artificial current. Even if you don't move, you will get somewhere, and then return to wherever you started. And if we may speak of the depth of a metaphor, well then it is about 3 feet deep, excepting a brief stretch at which point it rises to 6 feet 4. Here children scream, clinging to the walls or the nearest adult, until it is 3 feet deep once more. Round and round we go. All life is in here, flowing, flowing. Responses vary. Most of us float in the direction of the current, swimming a little or walking or treading water. Many employ some form of flotation devices, rubber rings, tubes, rafts, placing these items strategically under their arms or necks or backsides, creating buoyancy, and thus rendering what is already almost effortless easier still. Life is struggle. But we are on vacation from life and from struggle both. We are going with the flow. And having entered the lazy river, we must have a flotation device, even though we know rationally that the artificial current is buoyancy enough. Still, we want one. Branded floats, 2 large floats, comically shaped floats. They are a novelty, a luxury, they fill the time. We will complete many revolutions before their charm wears off, and for a few lucky souls it never will. For the rest of us, the moment arrives when we come to see that the lifeguard was right. These devices are too large, they're awkward to manage, tiresome. The plain fact is that we will all be carried along by the lazy river at the same rate, under the same relentless Spanish sun forever, until we are not. Some take this principle of universal flow to an extreme. They play dead, head down, limbs limp, making no effort whatsoever, and in this manner discover that even a corpse goes round. A few people, less tattooed, often university educated, make a point of turning the other way, intent upon thrashing out a stroke against the current, never advancing, instead holding their place, if only for a moment, as the others float past. It's a pose. It can't last long. I heard one man with a fashionable haircut say he could swim the whole length backward. I heard his hipster wife dare him to do it. But they had time for such games, having no children. But when he turned and made the attempt, he was swept away within the minute. The lazy river is a metaphor and at the same time a real body of artificial water in an all-inclusive hotel in Almeria, somewhere in southern Spain. We do not leave the hotel except to buy flotation devices. The plan is to beat our hotel at its own game. What you do is, you do this. You drink so much alcohol that your accommodation is effectively free. Only the most vulgar among us speak this plan aloud, but we are all on board. For in this hotel we are all British. We are en masse. We are unashamed. We enjoy one another's company. There's nobody French or German here to see us at the buffet, rejecting paella and swordfish in favour of sausage and chips, nor anyone to judge us as we lie on our loungers, turning from the concept of literature toward the reality of Sudoku. One of our tribe, an older gentleman, has a portrait of Amy Winehouse on each shin, and we do not judge him, not at all. How could we? We do not have so many saints of Amy's caliber left to us. We cherish her. She was one of the few who expressed our pain without ridiculing or diminishing it. It is therefore fitting that in the evenings, during the brief spell in which we emerge from the lazy river, we will, at karaoke hour, belt out her famous torch songs, full-throated, already drunk, content in the knowledge that later, much later, when all of this is over, these same beloved verses will be sung at our funerals. But karaoke was last night. Tonight we have a magician. He pulls rabbits from places, unexpected places. We go to sleep and dream of rabbits, wake up, re-enter the lazy river. You've heard of the circle of life? This is like that. Round and round we go. No, we have not seen the Moorish ruins, nor will we be travelling into those bare, arid mountains. Not one soul among us has read the recent novels set right here in Almeria, nor do we have any intention of doing so. We will not be judged. The lazy river is a non-judgment zone. This does not mean, however, that we are blind. For we too saw the polytunnels from the coach on the way in from the airport, and we saw the Africans who work here alone or in pairs, riding their bicycles in the merciless sun, moving between the polytunnels. Peering at them, I leaned my head against the shuddering glass of my window and, as in the fable of the burning bush, saw instead of the Africans a mirage. It was a vision of a little punnet of baby tomatoes wrapped in plastic, floating just outside my window in the almost desert among the Moorish ruins. Familiar in aspect, it was as real to me as my own hand. And upon that punnet I saw a barcode, and just above that barcode was written, "Product of Spain, Almeria." The vision passed. It was of no use to me or anyone at that moment on our vacation. For who are we to, and who are you to, and who are they to ask us, and whosoever cast the first? It's quite true that we, being British, could not point to the lazy river on a map of Spain, but it's also true that we have no need to do so, for we leave the water only to buy flotation devices, as mentioned above. True, too, that most of us voted for Brexit, and therefore cannot be sure if we will need a complicated visa to enter the lazy river come next summer. This is something we will worry about next summer. Among us there are a few souls from London, university educated, and fond of things like metaphors and remaining in Europe and swimming against the current. Whenever this notable minority is not in the lazy river, they warn their children off the endless chips and apply the highest possible factor of sun cream. And even in water they like to maintain certain distinctions. They will not do the Macarena. They will not participate in the Zumba class. Some say they are joyless, others that they fear humiliation. But to be fair, it is hard to dance in water. Either way, after eating, healthily, or buying a flotation device, unbranded, they will climb back into the metaphor with the rest, back into this watery Ouroboros, which, unlike the river of Heraclitus, is always the same, no matter where you happen to step in it. Yesterday, the lazy river was green. Nobody knows why. Theories abound. They all involve urine. Either the colour is the consequence of urine, or is the colour of the chemical put in to disguise the urine, or is the reaction of urine to chlorine or some other unknown chemical agent. I don't doubt urine is involved. I have peed in there myself. But it's not the urine that we find so disturbing. No, the sad consequence of the green is that it concentrates the mind in a very unpleasant way upon the fundamental artificiality of the lazy river. Suddenly what had seemed quite natural, floating slowly in an unending circle, while listening to the hit of the summer, which itself happens to be called Slowly, seems not only unnatural but surpassingly odd. Less like a holiday from life than like some kind of terrible metaphor for it. This feeling is not limited to the few fans of metaphor present. It is shared by all. If I had to compare it with something, it would be the shame that came over Adam and Eve as they looked at themselves and realized for the first time that they were naked in the eyes of others. What is the solution to life? How can it be lived well? Opposite our loungers are two bosomy girls, sisters. They arrive very early each morning, and instead of the common plastic loungers used by the rest of us, they manage to nab one of the rare white four-poster beds that face the ocean. These sisters are 18 and 19 years old. Their outdoor bed sports gauzy white curtains on all four sides to protect whoever lies upon it from the sun. But the sisters draw the curtains back, creating a stage, and lie out, perfecting their tans, often adjusting their bikini bottoms to check their progress, the thin line that separates brown stomach from pale groin. Blankly they gaze at their bare pubic mounds before lying back on the daybed. The reason I bring them up is that in the context of the lazy river, they are unusually active. They spend more time on dry land than anyone else, principally taking pictures of each other on their phones. For the sisters, this business of photographs is a form of labor that fills each day to its limit, just as the lazy river fills ours. It is an accounting of life that takes as long as life itself. We both step and do not step in the same rivers. We are and are not. So said Heraclitus. And so say the sisters, as they move in and out of shot, catching the flow of things, framing themselves for a moment, as they are, and as they are not. Personally, I am moved by their industry. No one is paying them for their labor, yet this does not deter them. Like photographers' assistants at real photo shoots, first they prep the area, cleaning it, improving it, discussing the angle of the light, and if necessary, they will even move the bed in order to crop from the shot anything unsightly. Stray trash, old leaves, old people. Prepping the area takes some time. Because their phones have such depth of image, even a sweet wrapper many yards away must be removed. Then their props are gathered. Pink flower petals, extravagant cocktails with photogenic umbrellas protruding from them, ice creams, to be photographed but not eaten, and on one occasion a book, held only for the duration of the photograph and, though perhaps only I noticed this, upside down. As they prep, each wears a heartbreaking pair of plain black spectacles. Once each girl is ready to pose, she hands her glasses to her sister. It is easy to say they make being young look like hard work, but wasn't it always hard work? Even if the medium of its difficulty was different. At least they're making a project of their lives. A measurable project that can be liked or commented upon. What are we doing? Floating? A 3-minute stroll from the back door of the hotel is the boardwalk, where mild entertainments are offered in the evening should we need something to do in the few darkling hours in which the lazy river is serviced, cleaned, and sterilized. One of these entertainments is, of course, the sea. But once you have entered the lazy river, with all its pliability and ease, its sterilizing chlorine and swift yet manageable currents, it is very hard to accept the sea. Its abundant salt, its marine life, those little islands of twisted plastic, not to mention its overfished depths, ever-warming temperature, and infinite horizons, reminders of death itself. We pass it by. We walk the boardwalk instead, beyond the two ladies who plait hair, onward a few minutes more until we reach the trampolines. This is the longest distance we have walked since our vacation began. We do it for the children. And now we strap our children into harnesses and watch them bounce up and down on the metaphor, up and down, as we sit on a low wall facing them and the sea, legs dangling, sipping at tumblers of vodka brought from the hotel, wondering if trampolines are not in the end a superior metaphor to lazy rivers. Life's certainly an up and down sort of affair. Although for children, the downs seem to come as a surprise. Almost as a delight, being so outrageous, so difficult to believe, whereas for us, sitting on the wall, clutching our tumblers, it's the ups that have come to appear a little preposterous, hard to credit. They strike us as a cunning bit of misdirection, rarer than a blood-red moon. Speaking of which, that night there was a blood-red moon. Don't look at me. Southern Spain has the highest ratio of metaphor to reality of any place I've ever known. There, everything is in everything else. And we all looked up at the blood-red moon, that bad faith moon of 2017. And each man and woman among us understood in that moment that there is no vacation you can take from a year such as this. Still, it was beautiful. It bathed our bouncing children in its red light and set the sea on fire. Then the time ran out. The children were enraged, not understanding yet about time running out, kicking and scratching us as we unstrapped them from their harnesses. But we did not fold. We did not give in. No, we held them close and accepted their rage, took it into our bodies, all of it, as we accept all their silly tantrums, as a substitute for the true outrage, which, of course, they do not yet know because we have not yet told them because we're on holiday, to which end we've come to a hotel with a lazy river. In truth, there is never a good moment. One day they will open a paper or a web page and read for themselves about the year 2050 or so, according to the prophets, when the time will run out. A year when they'll be no older than we are now. Not everything goes round and round. Some things go up and... On the way back to the hotel, we stopped by the ladies who plait hair, one from Senegal and the other from the Gambia. With the moon as red as it is, casting its cinematic light, we can glimpse the coast of their continent across the water from our own. But they did not cross this particular stretch of ocean because it is even more treacherous than the one between Libya and Lampedusa, by which route they came. Just looking at them, you can tell that they are both the type who could swim the lazy river backward and all the way round. In fact, isn't this what they have done? One is called Mariatu, the other Cynthia. For €10, they will plait hair in cane rows or Senegalese twists or high-ridged Dutch braids. In our party, 3 want their hair done. The ladies get to work. The men are in the polytunnels. The tomatoes are in the supermarket. The moon is in the sky. The Brits are leaving Europe. We are on a getaway. We still believe in getaways. It is hard in Spain, Mariatu says in answer to our queries. Very hard. To live well, Cynthia adds, pulling our daughter's hair, making her yelp, is not easy. By the time we reach the gates of the hotel, all is dark. A pair of identical twins, Rico and Rocco, in their 20s, with oily black curls and skinny white jeans, twin iPhones wedged in their tight pockets, have just finished their act and are packing up their boombox. We come runner-up X Factor Spain, they say in answer to our queries. We are Tunisia for birth, but now we are Spain. We wish them well and good night, and divert our children's eyes from the obscene bulge of those iPhones, the existence of which we have decided not to reveal to them for many years, or at least until they are 12. At the elevators, we separate from our friends and their children and ascend to our room, which is the same as their room and everybody's room, and put the children to bed and sit on the balcony with our laptops and our phones, where we look up his Twitter, as we have every night since January. Here and there, on other balconies, we spot other men and women on other lounges with other devices, engaged in much the same routine. Down below, the lazy river runs. A neon blue, a crazy blue, a Facebook blue. In it stands a fully clothed man, armed with a long mop. He is being held in place by another man, who grips him by the waist, so that the first man may angle his mop and position himself against the strong yet somniferous current and clean whatever scum we have left of ourselves off the sides. Now more than ever, there is an urge to be good, to be seen to be good, to be seen, also to be. Badness, invisibility, Things as they are in reality as opposed to things as they seem. Death itself, these are out of fashion. This is basically what I told Mary. I said, Mary, all these things I just mentioned are not really done anymore. And also, while we're on the subject, that name of yours is not going to fly. Nobody's called Mary these days. It's painful for me even to say your name. Actually, could you get the hell out of here? Mary left. Scout came by. A great improvement. Scout is so involved and active. She is on all platforms and rarely becomes aware of anything much later than, say, the 300th person. By way of comparison, the earliest I've ever been aware of anything was that time I was the 10,206th person to see that thing. There's evidently a considerable gulf between Scout and me. But that's why I'm always so appreciative of her coming by and giving me news. Now, according to Scout, the news is, that the past is now also the present. I invited her to pull up a stool at my mid-century modern breakfast bar and unpack that a little for me. The light that afternoon was beautiful. From my place on the 11th floor, I could see all the way to the Hudson, and it filled me with optimism and an eagerness to be schooled. But Scout was cautious. Believing me incapable of either transhistorical thought or platform mastery, she placed a New York Sports Club tote bag on the counter and pulled out 2 puppets, homemade, insultingly basic. The first was a recognizably female human, although she had long arms, terribly long, at least 3 times the length of her body and no nose. The other was a kind of triangular spindle with a smudgy face painted on both sides, trailing thread from its corners, which I could have sworn I'd seen someplace before. Scout's demonstration was quite detailed. I don't want to get into it all here, but the essence of it was consistency. You've got to reach far, far back, she explained, into the past, hence the arms, and you've got to make sure that when you reach back thusly, you still understand everything back there in the exact manner in which you understand things presently. For if it should turn out that you don't, that is, if after some digging someone finds evidence that present you is fatally out of step with past you, well, then you'll simply have to find some way to remake the connection, and you've got to make it seamless. Not double-faced or double-sided, like this triangle spindle guy, but seamless, because otherwise you are, and were, in all kinds of trouble. Seamless. Seamless. At which point we both got hungry and paused to order a couple of poke bowls. Here's a question for you, re-consistency, I said, putting my elbows on the counter. I know this woman who's a big fancy CEO. Her name is Natalia Lefkowitz. She's totally squared the past with the present, is admired by all, and is not only seen to be good, but actually does good in the world for many people, providing clean water and equitable job creation and maternity leave and plenty of other inarguable benefits for women here, there, and everywhere. But yesterday she got this message. I showed Scout the message which I had received on my phone from someone called Ben Traynor, apparently an ex-boyfriend of Natalia, whose son, Natalia's son, was in my Kafka and Kierkegaard class a few years ago. According to this Ben Traynor, Natalia had liked to do things in the very recent past that were not consistent with her existence in the present. Stuff like sodomizing Ben Traynor while pretending to be his mother. Also calling him daddy while he pretended to be holding her as a sex slave in a crawl space underneath her own East Hampton kitchen. At the time, they'd both agreed to these oppositional kinks, but when they broke up, it occurred to Ben that, although there was no contradiction between his own life and his intimate life, Ben worked as the general manager of a leather bar down on Rivington, there was surely a big old gap between how Natalia morally lauded it around in her professional existence and the weird shit she was into behind closed doors. In Ben's opinion, these dark desires went way beyond kink into problematic, which was the reason he was texting everybody in Natalia's address book to let them know. Scout, I asked, do you think she should be afraid? Do I think she should be afraid? That's your question? That's my question. Scout packed up her puppets and left, accusing me of flippancy and misjudging the current climate. We never even got to the pokey. Sometimes I think I don't ask the right questions. In my apartment building, as in many throughout the city, we have this new routine. We stand at our windows, all of us, from the 2nd floor to the 17th, and hold aloft large signs with black arrows on them. The arrows point to other apartments. In our case, to the apartments of our colleagues at the university. The only abstainers are the few remaining Marxists, mainly in the history department, though we have a few in English and sociology too, who like to argue that the whole process is fundamentally Stalinist, which is like calling a child Mary. Who even uses that kind of language these days? Bendelstein, Eastman, and Waite are pointing at me. A purely defensive move. I have done nothing wrong and am no one, and they're only trying to distract attention from themselves. I am pointing at Eastman in his dank little studio with the paisley carpet. Yes, since my illuminating discussion with Scout, I've decided to join the majority of my colleagues in the philosophy department and point at Eastman, because who doesn't know about Eastman? How Eastman still has a job, we really don't know. Not only does he not believe the past is the present, but he has gone further and argued that the present, in the future, will be just as crazy looking to us in the present as the past is presently to us right now. Oh, for Eastman, surely it's only a matter of time. I made a date with young Scout to go to the forum. I felt we'd taken a wrong turn and I wanted to get our friendship back on track. I don't like this friction between the generations. We went to see A Place in the Sun, starring Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor and Shelley Winters. I don't do that just to be cute. I genuinely feel bad for Shelley Winters, and if you've ever seen that movie, with its carnival of physical beauty, into which poor, plain Shelley Winters has been placed as counterbalance, you'll know that 8-point type is a fair and accurate representation of the situation. The anti-hero of this picture, by strange coincidence, is called Eastman. George Eastman. He's played by Clift, who always makes me want to type the word febrile. It's as if he's so beautiful, it's making him ill. When I mentioned this to Scout, she asked me why I thought physically objectifying men was any different from objectifying women. I had no answer. I returned to my popcorn. George Eastman is the poor, East Coast relation of a rich California family that runs a big, successful bikini business. Young Eastman grew up in his super-religious mother's Christian mission, proselytizing on the streets, probably shaking a can for coins, but now he's come out west to ask his old Uncle Eastman for a job. To cut a long story short, he falls in love with 2 girls. One is sweet, ordinary, sincere, lower class, Shelley Winters. Shelley works with him on the factory floor, stuffing bikinis into boxes, and happens not to be able to swim. This will become important later. The other is hot as hell, Elizabeth Taylor. Rich, upper class, an Eastman family friend. Seeing as he has no chance with Taylor, George gets things going with Shelley, although relationships are banned in the factory, and if they're discovered, they'll both lose their jobs. Unfortunately, Shelley falls pregnant. All of this is sometimes hard to follow because the movie was made in 1951 and everything's buried under the Hays Code. No one says pregnant or I want an abortion. But despite the polite cutaways and the euphemistic language, you get the picture. 2 unmarried people, with no money, who hardly know each other, are about to have a baby that neither of them wants. What to do? Shelley thinks the only solution is to get married. George doesn't want to. In the middle of this crisis, George bumps into Taylor again. This time, she notices that he looks like Montgomery Clift and falls madly in love with him. So now Shelley is a problem. Gotta get rid of Shelley. But how? To distract himself from the urgency of this question, George accepts an invitation to Taylor's parents' beach house and spends a weekend looking tanned and expensive, beautiful and happy, and not at all like a poor boy from Chicago who once walked the streets pleading with the lost and the sinful to join him in the bosom of Christ. Throughout this section of the movie, Scout kept leaning over to ask me, did Montgomery Clift make this before or after his car accident IRL? I really couldn't say. Whenever I thought it was after, I found myself noticing strange marks on his face, a cut on his cheek or the scar from a huge laceration on his neck. But then when I thought it was before, his face looked perfect to me, as if God had taken Brando and Dean and found a way to combine them in a delicious man sandwich. At a certain point, while George is trying to forget his troubles at the beach, Shelley Winters calls from the bus station and says that if he doesn't marry her right away, she's going to come over to that beach house, publicly expose him, and fuck up his whole life. He makes his excuses to Taylor and her family and goes to meet Shelley. They head to the registry office to get married, but it's closed. To calm her, George suggests a picnic out in the woods, by the lake, and maybe that's when he remembers the time she told him she couldn't swim. He hires a rowboat under a false name and takes her out on the water, apparently with the full intention of killing her. And she does die that very day in murky circumstances. The 2 of them argue in the little rowboat, It tips, they fall in. And the next thing we see is George dragging himself up the bank. Did he try to save her? Did he swim away? Did he force her head down, down, down into the water? Was it murder in the first degree? Or in some other degree? Was it even murder? We can't know. We'll never know. George heads back to his weekend paradise. Taylor's parents' black maid happens to be making lunch. You see her only 3 or 4 times and she barely speaks, but let's just say that she had my full attention. I admired the way she acted as if she were fully invested in this drama, unfolding at Taylor's parents' beach house, even though, in my mental version, this fictional maid's fictional brother was one of the several thousand people who were lynched, IRL, in the first half of the 20th century. Each time she appeared, I gave her a little improvised dialogue, whispering it into Scout's ear. Yes, miss, I'll bring the dessert out now. I mean, my brother was lynched not long ago down in Arkansas, but I can see you've got bigger fish to fry. I'll get right on it. I let out a sort of ugly laugh as I said it. But I knew that nothing I could do in the present could ameliorate or change this fictional fact. No, all I could do was remember it, and tell myself I was remembering it, so that it wasn't forgotten, although with the mental proviso that suffering has no purpose in reality. To the suffering person, suffering is solely suffering. It's only for others, as a symbol, that suffering takes on any meaning or purpose. No one ever got lynched and thought, well, at least this will lead inexorably to the civil rights movement. They just shook, suffered, screamed, and died. Pain is the least symbolic thing there is. There's a key scene, after my stoic maid has tidied lunch away, when Taylor and George and a load of other happy young rich people jump into a flashy speedboat that's leaving from the dock. Off they fly, whooping and smiling with their perfect American teeth. Meanwhile we, the anxious folk at the forum, stay on the dock, in the foreground, where a lone radio sits, and we listen to this radio as the happy young people frolic in the distance. We hear that Shelley Winters has died in a lake, that the police think it's murder and they're closing in on the perpetrator. Which means that everyone on that boat, including Elizabeth Taylor, will soon know that George Eastman, a.k.a. Montgomery Clift, is guilty as sin, or is guilty to some, perhaps ultimately unknowable, degree. I found myself clutching Scout's hand, quietly weeping. Later, on the way out of the cinema, Scout asked me if I instinctively sympathized with the rich and the happy. I said I didn't understand the question. She said, I'll put it another way. You instinctively sympathize with perpetrators instead of victims. Since that was less a question than a statement, all I could do was add a statement to her statement. I said, in our philosophy department at the university, we feel that, just as there are degrees of sin or error, there are degrees of sympathy. It's not a zero-sum game, or it used not to be, in the past. Well, there's your problem, Scout said. You're two-faced, you're looking the wrong way, and if you don't watch out, you're going to find yourself beyond the pale. She went off to catch the 1 train while I trudged back to my tower alone, making note of the fact that I'd be seeing no more films at the Forum for a spell, because it was closing for the summer, so that a 4th screen could be built. That's what I need, I thought as I walked. A 4th screen. If I had a 4th screen, no reality could get through the cracks at all. I would be able to live only in symbol, and then surely everything would be easier. I was at LaGuardia Place before I noticed that almost everyone on the 6th floor was angling their arrows upward, directly at my apartment, though I wasn't even there. Montgomery Clift isn't rich or happy. He's guilty. I instinctively sympathize with the guilty. That's my guilty secret. In the current climate, a high school student wrote to me. Dear Professor, I am a high school English student in South Bend, Indiana, and I'm quite intrigued by your use of metaphor in your recent piece in Philosophy Today. But why did you choose to make the metaphor so obvious? And why would you not really take a stand for or against by specifically saying his name? And why would you choose to omit his name if you are taking a stand? Thanks, a high school student. I wrote back, Dear high school student, have you seen that video? It's a little like that. Some things are so obvious that subtle metaphor is impossible. In that video, for example, There was no point in being subtle about the state-funded violence inflicted on black people in this country. The only way was to show it explicitly. And when we saw all those people dancing in the foreground, that was again the most obvious metaphor possible, i.e., while you're watching these black people dance and entertain you, other black people are dying. As to your other question, I guess it seems to me that some things are so low, or evil, or contemptible that they barely deserve a name. Giving them a name would be to honour them more than they deserve. See also He Who Shall Not Be Named. Yours, Professor. This did not particularly satisfy the high school student, and I can see why. Apart from anything else, I was the 10,206th person to watch that video, so my opinions on it were easily discounted. And even the Lord himself called the devil a variety of euphemistic names. Besides, teenagers can sniff out the truth. The truth is, I didn't want to be deported. The next week, making no reference whatsoever to our previous exchange, the high school student struck again. "Hey, Professor, it's me, back to bother ya. My English teacher is having us write a prompt comparing certain eras of literature and what their authors would say in response to Hamlet's quintessence of dust monologue. 99.9% of the authors are dead, but you are very much alive. I have pasted the monologue below just in case you are not familiar with it. Thank you so much for your time." I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. Forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. In this most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave, o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof, fretted with golden fire, why, it appeareth no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapours. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving how express, and admirable, in action how like an angel, in apprehension how like a god, the beauty of the world, paragon of animals. And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? "Thanks, a high schooler." I replied, "Dear high schooler, I'd say he's having a quarter-life crisis. Best, Professor. P.S. I know it's not much, but on the other hand, as you say, almost everybody else is dead, and I am very much alive." I bumped into someone on Bleecker who was beyond the pale. I felt like talking to him, so I did. As we talked, I kept thinking, but you're beyond the pale. Yet instead of that stopping us from talking, we started to talk more and more frantically, babbling like a couple of maniacs about a whole load of things. Shame, ruin, public humiliation, the destruction of reputation, that immortal part of oneself, the contempt of one's wife, one's children, one's colleagues, personal pathology, exposure, suicidal ideation, and all that jazz. I thought, maybe if I am one day totally and finally placed beyond the pale, I too might feel curiously free of expectation, of the opinions of others, of a lot of things. "It's like prison," he said, not uncheerfully. "You don't see anybody, and you get a lot of writing done." If you're wondering where he would be placed on a badness scale of 1 to 10, as I understand it, he is, by general admission, hovering between a 2 and a 3. He did not have victims so much as annoyed parties. What if he had victims? Would I have talked to him then? But surely in that case, in an ideal world, after a trial in court, he would have been sent to a prison, or, if you have more enlightened ideas about both crime and punishment, to a therapeutic facility that helps people not to make victims of their fellow humans. Would I have visited him in prison? Probably not. I can't drive, and besides, I've never volunteered for one of those programs in which sentimental people, under the influence of the Gospels, consider all humans to be essentially victims of one another and of themselves, and so go to visit even the worst offenders, bringing them copies of the Gospels and also sweaters they've knitted. But that wasn't the case here. He was beyond the pale. I wasn't. We said our goodbyes, and I returned to my tower, keeping away from the window for the afternoon, not being in the mood for either signs or arrows. I didn't know where I was on the scale back then, last week. I was soon to find out. Boy, was I soon to find out. But right now, in the present I'm telling you about, I saw through a glass darkly. Like you, probably. Like a lot of people. Then I made a mistake. This was yesterday. If you're anything like Scout, you probably heard about it already. Scout emailed me 15 minutes after it happened to commiserate and also to alert me to the fact that she would not be emailing me anymore. How it happened was, one of our poets said something beyond the pale. He's one of the newer poets, the musical kind, and so his words tend to go everywhere, floating between our towers, rising above the city. People were appalled, furious. All arrows pointed to him. And I said, look, politically, you're absolutely within your rights to be angry, but existentially, you're wrong. Existentially, this particular poet just wants us all to be free. As a matter of fact, he's not even a poet at all. He's a philosopher. Yes, I said it. He's one of us. But then the poet himself said that philosophy makes nothing happen, and also that he happened to quite like the devil, whom we sometimes call the adversary and sometimes nothing at all. And then he said that he was glad that he who shall not be named had come to power, because he admired his energy, his inability to distinguish between past, present and future. And soon after that, the poet got cancelled, and soon after that, me too. The silence. A great silence opened up inside her, but that made it sound more dramatic than it was. It happened by degrees, creeping up slyly. And at times, in certain places and situations, it was expected and welcome, on a long walk, or when a person confessed something pitiful, or at a funeral, or a party. In all those places, where once she'd had a lot to say, too much, honestly. Now there was this silence, and she became a far better listener. Not consciously, that was just one of the consequences. It wasn't a Zen silence or an enlightened silence or anything she'd worked to achieve. It was only a sort of blank. Once, on a mini break, she'd spotted a sentence graffitied on a bridge in Paris. The world is everything that is the case. It was written in English and stuck in her mind. The silence felt like that. It spoke for itself. But it could also offend and disappoint others the same way the world itself never seems enough for some people. It was no use on big family occasions, for example, or when one of her adult daughters called her name from another room, or if someone at work asked for her view on the news of the day. It could make other people feel awkward. But when she was alone with it, whenever it coincided with her own long-standing habit of looking upward into the branches of trees, then it didn't really bother her at all. When a person looked at a tree, there was no expectation of speech or thought. The light passed silently through the clusters of leaves. There was nothing to say. This combination, leaves, light, silence, which you can find everywhere, which is so easy to come by, this now had the power to make her cry. Happy tears, as her girls called them. And so she was often in tears. They rolled down her face unimpeded, because her eyelashes were no longer thick enough to halt them. She'd worn too much mascara back in the day. Someone should warn her daughters about that, she thought. It wouldn't be her, though, because of this silence. Like everybody, Sharon felt young inside, essentially unchanged since late adolescence, and often had trouble integrating the person in the mirror with the young soul she felt herself to be. But here the silence was useful, clarifying, because she was definitely not like those talkative teenagers on the bus. Comparing her silence with their noise, she understood that she was infinitely old, like a tree. And it wasn't only that she spoke so much less than they did, but also that her inner voice, the ever-present internal narrative, the self-regarding monologue, which she now realized had always been in some sense preparing itself to perform, so that it could become a character for other people out there in the world, in the hope that these others might love and understand her, that was gone too. It wasn't like this for the kids on the bus. Any fool could see that. They were still talking, to themselves and to anyone who would listen. Hearing them actually made her retrospectively embarrassed, thinking back 30 years to how she talked up a storm at all those birthdays and barbecues and church fetes and intimate encounters she'd gone on, not realizing. Her elders had mostly been kind about it, and these days she aspired to exactly that type of kindness, making a conscious effort to look fondly on the chatter of her own daughters and promising herself that she would never tell either of them about this silence, which gets planted within you sometime in the middle of your life, without your even noticing, then grows in darkness like a tuber night after night until it suddenly breaks the topsoil of your life and takes over. Until recently, Sharon had worked on a hospital ward for mothers with postpartum psychosis. She was not a doctor or a therapist. She worked in administration, but still her duties included managing and monitoring these troubled young women. The hospital's mission being to care for the babies and the mothers in their moment of crisis, so that the babies were not taken away and permanently rehomed. It was interesting and satisfying work. For 20 years, she felt herself to be in her exact right place, doing a job that only she could do in this particular corner of London. Part of this certainty stemmed back to her childhood, to her own brush with what she now knew not to term madness. She was about 10 years old at the time. She had stood in front of a mirror in her mother's flat and had intrusive thoughts. And for a few days after that, she'd actually heard voices, many of them, very loud in her head. These voices were accompanied by a sense of seeing sentences move around her bedroom, liberated from the page, just floating on the ceiling and in front of her eyes, almost all of them from the Bible. Luckily, whatever this was did not last, and after those few days, never happened again. But it sparked a permanent curiosity. As a teenager, she watched a lot of films set in mental institutions and began to feel that she might be the right kind of person to work in the field. Yet she was never mathematical or scientific, did badly in school, and hated the self-regard and imperiousness of doctors, both on screen and in real life. Even when she went for childhood checkups, she'd felt patronized, and meeting the psychiatric consultants on the ward years later did not do much to change her opinion. Still, her work brought her joy. She took special pride in the fact that hers was a job that could not be advertised or passed on to another person in any simple way. The role had developed around her and her particular skills, like a dress, cut for her body alone. She was a secretary and an administrator, yes, but she also knew exactly how to speak to the shell-shocked fathers, suddenly confronted with the ravings and violence of their partners, knew how to comfort or entertain bewildered children in the family room as their mothers screamed on the other side of the wall. She dealt with government inspectors, private insurers, police, social workers, the cleaners, orderlies, midwives, nurses, and doulas. To her initial surprise, rich women could also lose their minds. People said things like, "Sharon is the beating heart of this operation." And when they spoke in this way, she did not act fake humble or correct them. It was true. She could talk to anyone, and she didn't judge. These, her two main skills, were valued on the ward. She was able to keep her cool while all about her swirled this mysterious, fascinating miasma of what she'd once called madness, swallowing the women whole, creating a cloud of misunderstanding between them and the world. It was not her job to correct this misunderstanding. Her job was to make the experience of the ward tolerable for both sides, for the sane and the insane. These were not terms she used on the ward. She applied them only when talking to herself. Though she never did fully comprehend the science of the women's condition, she had made her own amateur observations through the years, watching as patients confronted the intrusive thoughts and devilish voices, the hallucinations, the paranoia, the signs and symbols, the interconnectedness of everything. She noticed how often those connections seemed to pass through figures familiar to her: Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, Satan, angels, demons, and she was comforted by the persistence of them, the way they turned up even here, on the other side of sanity. Once she made the mistake of trying to express this to one of the consultants. She got told off. She had expressed herself awkwardly, clumsily, okay, but was it necessary to speak to her like that? And in front of a nurse? In Morocco, they talk of Allah, the consultant explained, speaking to her as if she were a child. And in New York, everybody thinks they're in the Truman Show. On your island, they'd probably speak of the spirit. The context changes, but the patient's broken mode of processing reality remains the same. She nodded at this consultant, privately resolving never to speak to him again. This was around the time that the silence began to take root within her. It was irrational, she knew, but she blamed the consultant. He was like the man who spits an apple seed on the ground, not imagining the tree that will grow from it. As valued as she had always felt on the ward, she was aware that she'd come into her own during COVID. The obligatory PPE arrived, she put it on, and in this way she discovered that she had the gift of speaking to people using only her eyes. Turned out not everybody had this gift. The women on the ward were terrified by the sudden invasion of masked people. But even when deep in their delusions, not a one of them mistook masked Sharon for a duppy or a djinn or a zombie, as they so often did with the consultant psychiatrists. She truly became an essential worker. Behind her mask, though, the silence bloomed. Not speaking to a consultant was no loss, but she was meant to speak to the nurses and the families and the 2 women who worked in the office with her, and all of that became increasingly difficult. She struggled for a year, telling no one, until the silence took on such a dimension that it became an impediment to her work, even a danger to the patients. A well-meaning female consultant took her aside, lecturing Sharon about a series of drugs she had taken, which were a godsend. They had saved her, apparently. She hadn't gotten them from the NHS, but she believed you probably could, with a bit of effort, although whatever the NHS prescribed would most likely not be hormone identical. Sharon listened patiently to all this nonsense, returned to her cubicle and got on with her day. A few weeks later, one of the cleaners, Iphigenia, spotted Sharon, pearled with sweat and deep in silence, staring into space. Iphigenia explained that in Guinea, the women eat yams. That same day, Sharon went to the African food shop on Kilburn High Road and brought many more yams than usual, boiled them, mashed them, and ate them with everything for months. Her daughters thought she was crazy. Her husband had always had a soft spot for yams and was glad for the sudden bounty. The silence grew anyway. She decided to take early retirement. On her final day, she got a box and went to clear out her cubicle, unpinning the postcards and photographs that had long decorated the space, every one of them, she now realized, the portrait of a silent person, although the silence in each case was different. The Ife head from Nigeria was a proud silence, the pride of a self-sufficient empire. The old photograph of her husband was silent because that young man no longer existed, having been superseded by 8 or 9 different versions of the same man. She couldn't remember what on earth this long-ago handsome boy was smiling about or what, his mouth slightly open, as if about to speak, he was on the verge of saying. But there he sat, smiling in a cafe in Bath, with sun-drenched, oolitic limestone behind his head, a healthy young man, with no idea that he would ever be otherwise. They had both asked a lot of questions about the architecture that weekend. It was their first time out of London, ever. And that was how they'd learned that the stone in Bath was called oolitic limestone. Not that it mattered any more what it was called. Her husband was now a chronically ill man, and the responsibility for the family rested entirely on her shoulders. The world is everything that is the case. Next to her boy husband was a little photo of her best friend, smiling and silent, but in her case, it was the silence of the grave. On the back of the photo, the funeral home had printed her name, the dates of her birth and death, and the sentence, "What is written upon thy forehead, thou wilt come to it," which sounded biblical, but her friend had been an Algerian Muslim. When Sharon Googled it, an AI overview explained that it came from Hindu and somehow also Islamic tradition and meant basically that you get what's coming to you. She frowned, reading this. Predestination did not appeal to her, not in those traditions or in her own. It was too much story, somehow. Too much knowing. Not enough silence. She didn't even like it when her daughter said, "Everything happens for a reason." For if that were true, and everyone got what was coming to them, well, then that would have to include the young man pushed in front of the train, the children bombed from above, the women raped during a coup, and of course, the aggressive cancer that had struck down her dear Algerian friend when she was only 37. No. The final postcard was the one with the lovely Harlem Renaissance girl in her pretty pink dress. Her silence was pensive. Dark-skinned,
beautiful, with a Marcel wave. She looked a little like Sharon's grandmother. The Harlem girl was anxious, you could tell. It was 1927 and she was wondering what America's future might hold for her. There were certainly a lot of things that Sharon could have told the girl about that future, revelations concerning what was coming for her people during the rest of the 20th century and beyond. But if you talk to postcards on a ward for psychotic mothers, people will think you're crazy. Silently, she peeled the Harlem girl off the side of her computer monitor, scraped away the blue tack on her reverse side, and put her with the rest of the silent people back in their box. 56 was young to retire, and everybody was worried. It was not obvious to anyone how a woman of her age and background and skill set would ever get another job in this economy. Her husband and daughters had a lot to say on the topic. Too much. Who did she think she was retiring? And how were they going to live? Both her daughters were still at home. Neither had a job. Her husband was on benefits. These were all good questions, but they required answers that she could no longer voice. Instead, she went online, found a flight for £89 if you only took hand luggage, and flew to Krakow. She had gone to Krakow once before, when she was young, and Krakow was cheaper than Rome or Paris and seemed far less intimidating. There wasn't so much you were supposed to know about it in advance. But the city had not seen many women like her, and as she'd walked down a cobblestone road, a man had stared at her and shouted something unintelligible. This made her young husband lose his temper and bump chests with the man, although she'd begged him not to, and after that they'd spent a fair portion of their first ever European mini-break arguing in the street. These days the city seemed full of new arrivals from every corner of the globe, and perhaps as a consequence of this, no one paid Sharon any mind. It was truly as if she didn't exist. She no longer had to approach a foreign city like a test, one she was destined to fail. And there were no children, young or old, for her to negotiate with or find a toilet for, and no husband to argue with about restaurants or local prices, and no one was shouting at her in Polish. No planned visits to museums or facts to read up on, no itinerary at all. It was August, and the weather was beautiful. She sat in a public square under a beech tree. The light came filtering through the leaves. At the time of that long-ago mini-break, there had been some debate about whether the Polish man in question had shouted a slur or made some kind of sexual comment, the latter being considered more likely because of the thin yellow summer dress she had been wearing at the time, and her breasts and her legs and her backside and all the things about her that were the case back then, before children, before her husband sickened, before she had attended the funerals of friends, before everything. Back then she carried her body like a precious commodity. Beautiful girls were passing by her right now as she sat on this bench, and she thought that she'd been totally right all those years ago. She had been precious, and so were these girls. Everyone talks about the beauty of nature, but people are far more beautiful. So Sharon felt, even if she no longer had the words to express it. Nature is only a backdrop, like scenery at the theatre, and all the man-made objects only props. People are the beauty and the light and the point and the purpose. This had always been clear to her on the ward, where everything was either white plastic or that industrial British hospital grey, and by contrast each young woman was like an astonishing flare sent up into a dark sky. Mesmerizing. She herself had been mesmerizing. Still was, but now nobody noticed. She could sit on a bench in Europe completely unmolested, without a single human being saying a word to her until the sun fell out of the sky. Silence within, silence without. But even if her own beauty was now lost on the world, gobbled up by it, the same way the stone in Bath eats up a sunbeam, and the leaves eat light and become translucent, revealing their fragile skeletons like the bones in a bat's wing, she still noticed the beauty in others. And she celebrated it, silently. The beautiful girls, yes, of course, but everybody else too. She certainly appreciated the beech tree above her head, and the light passing through its leaves, and the sudden sweep of bats that flew low through the square right over her, but never, ever would she mistake all that natural beauty for the true glory that was people. Even if she didn't speak to another person for the rest of her life, she felt she could never be confused on that point. Suddenly the sun had gone and the street lamps were lit. They were Victorian-looking with curlicues of iron, but they were electric. No one seemed at all startled at the way they instantly illuminated the square, revealing lovers and drinkers and darting squirrels and a strange, dark woman sitting alone on a bench staring at a beech tree. But to Sharon this warm August day had seemed, until just a moment ago, as long and as broad as the silence. It was a surprise that it could end, that this moment of sitting on a bench in the Polish sunlight wasn't going to last forever. The notifications buzzing in her back pocket were becoming more frantic, arriving every few minutes now. There were far too many to scroll through. Prying the phone out of her pocket, she laid it on her thigh and glanced at the most recent. "Please, Mum, Dad's frantic." "Who do you even know in Poland? Do you have a hotel? Somewhere to stay?" The truth was, she was waiting for someone to take her to bed. She stared meaningfully at the people who passed her, their waists at her eye level, and knew that they could have no idea how little it would take for her to stand up and follow any one of them home. It would take nothing at all. How could they imagine such a thing? She was silent. Didn't want to ask, didn't want to be rejected, or even accepted. No. She wanted to make herself clear, using only her eyes, without resorting to any of her daughter's careful, sensible conversations about consent. She didn't even want an introduction. To be taken in silence and delivered in silence and returned to silence. Anyone. Whoever passed or momentarily sat by her on the bench, or could be spied drinking European beers at outdoor tables with those stunning yellow umbrellas, the colour of daffodils. Every one of these strangers was more than welcome to come over and penetrate or otherwise envelop her in some way, sucking, fucking, spitting, rutting, kissing, stripping, tying, holding, dominating, submitting. There were no boundaries anymore. From dust you have come, and to dust you shall return. And somewhere in the middle of that process, her boundaries had become fluid, and now it appeared that Sharon might literally do anything. What would her pastor say if he saw her? Perhaps that she had been invaded by demons, which was what he thought about the women on the ward. But it turned out pastors knew some things, and not others. Daughters too. They knew some things, and not others. Husbands and consultants also. If pressed, Sharon thought, she would admit to believing that there is a gigantic mystery at the centre of the world, a many-faceted jewel, and that no person glimpses more than a facet of it. She didn't know the science behind it, or rather, the theology, but she knew that much. One day soon she would be dead and buried, and daffodils would grow out of what once was Sharon. Her husband would mourn her. Theirs had been a great love. And some facet of Sharon would continue to be visible, no doubt, through her girls. But to everybody else, she would become a mere aspect of the world, to be noticed or ignored. Just another one of those things that are or were the case like everything else. But surely one of these Polish people had a room, somewhere she could stay as the temperature dropped. If only she could formulate the question. She'd never spoken during sex, come to think of it, and maybe the silence that had originated in that part of her life was now spreading over all her human activities, even mini-breaks. What is a mini-break? She looked up and saw that it was moonlight filtering through the leaves of the beech, silvery, delicate. Happy tears ran down her face with nothing to stop them. She worried that she might look to these Polish people like someone who had crossed an ocean in a small boat and now lived on the streets of Krakow, specifically on this bench. Then suddenly she understood why she was there. It appeared as words in front of her, luminous and yellow and crackling, as if written in the night air with a sparkler. The Krakow Chakra, a holy, silent place. Years ago, a guidebook had led Sharon the newlywed to seek out a place called Wawel Castle and put her hand against the spot where a magical stone had landed, supposedly thrown by a Hindu god, all the way from India to Poland. According to this guidebook, the stone had buried itself in Krakow, in a corner of a courtyard, inside a castle, and tourists came from all over the world just to be in its presence, to feel the vibrations from this mystical stone. Or, in Sharon's case, to take a picture of her husband standing stiffly on the spot and then to change places with him and submit to a photo herself, and then later to put these photos above the electric fire in their first flat as evidence that they too could be tourists, could look at things, and not only be looked at. Yes, she had come to Poland to stand in that mystical courtyard again, in that special corner, to feel the cosmic energy, but really feel it this time, because she would be standing there not as a pretty, skeptical, well-defended young woman with a lot to say, in a yellow dress, on top of the world, but as a silent being who had travelled to this place from a point lower down, far lower, fully humbled by the world, an infinitely old person who was half tree and knew only a shard-like facet of the everything that is the case, who finally knew all the things she didn't know. Silent. Unlike on her first visit, she had nothing to say about the 7 chakras of the world, their reality, or otherwise. No view as to whether these world chakras could possibly correspond to the ones in the body, given that neither exists. A middle-aged woman with no opinions on ancient superstition, on what her husband called urban legends, or even on the legitimacy of faiths other than her own, practiced in faraway lands by brown people who, though brown, looked nothing like her. And, as if on cue, she spotted one such person approaching. An angel messenger. A young brown woman with wonderful jet black hair, wearing the same North Face jacket that everybody in Poland, and perhaps on Earth, now wore, except Sharon, a jacket that had slowed her progress through Krakow because every time she saw those 3 white words, the North Face, she felt compelled to stop and face north. At least now she knew why. She stood up. She faced north. There it was, on the hill. The castle. She followed the sacred brown girl northward, all the way to the castle, at the entrance of which the girl turned left and disappeared, having fulfilled her role, having delivered Sharon to the very gates. Maybe that was what happened in the middle of a woman's life. She got delivered to the gates. How lovely, this castle. A Renaissance courtyard surrounded by a classical arcade in white, arc after arc after arc, like the old town in Kingston, Jamaica. Everywhere reminded her of everywhere else these days, as if the beginning of her life and its forthcoming end were meeting. She looked up into the recesses of each alcove, the way the stone ate light and cast shadows. And then there was the ivy on the walls, lifting and falling in the slight breeze, as if the courtyard itself were breathing. Sharon followed the ivy as it stretched itself from wall to wall, a clutch of desperate tendrils, curling from one corner to the next, like a young mother feeling her way down a dark corridor looking for her child. A bell rang. People seemed in a terrible hurry to get to the famous, mystic corner. There was nothing special looking about the particular patch of wall. It was just a corner. But everybody wanted to stand there. And the castle's gates would soon close. Time was running out. It was clear to Sharon that there were all kinds of ways to approach the situation, many of which were unfolding right in front of her, and for a while she stood back and silently observed. Some people touched the wall with a flat palm, waited a moment, walked away. A few pressed their backs against the wall and half crouched, eyes closed, as if sitting in imaginary chairs. One bold young woman lay on the ground and put her feet up, wide apart. The chakra was her gynecologist. The chakra was a midwife, come to deliver the woman's baby Jesus and keep him safe until she understood that he was not really Jesus. A young man in a North Face thrust his groin at the corner as if he wanted to fuck the Krakow chakra or imagined it would bring him some advantage down there. He looked back over his shoulder at his friends as he did this, laughing, and they all laughed with him. Young men, in Sharon's narrow experience, seemed to be afforded only the tiniest glimpse of the many-faceted mystery, to the point that most of them appeared entirely blind to it. Sharon had no sons, but she'd met the young men who came in and out of her daughter's bedrooms. The facets of the world, Sharon suspected, revealed themselves to people at different times. There had to be a reason that all the fairy tales speak of wise old women. That it was usually the oldest woman in the village who got the better of Sly and Nancy. Sharon approached the wall. To her left, not a foot away, stood an old white woman. Her right hand looked like the hands most people have, but her other hand was very flat, tinged purple and green, mottled like a fish's belly, and hanging like a dead fish. The woman seemed to have no control over it. It didn't move or spasm. It only flopped, lifeless, an appendage. Never had Sharon seen anything like it. For a moment, she forgot all about the Krakow chakra. Though she had always hated to be stared at and had fiercely admonished her daughters, as children, never to stare, she now found that she could not help herself. The world is everything that is the case. It is the fish in Jamaica, trawled in from Treasure Beach, who lie thunderstruck on the sand, mouths open, amazed to be so dead, so out of their element. It is also the fish that sit in the melting ice in the Irish fish shop, stinking up the Kilburn High Road in the summer, horseflies squatting in their eyeballs. And it is all the hands, reaching for the Christ child, batting away evil spirits, grasping after floating words. Hands that work and don't work. Minds that work and don't work, or not in the way the consultants wish they would. Fish at home in the sea, fish out of their element, from the north face to the south face, from the sunlight to the moonlight, from a seed to a tree. What a world! The woman was about 20 years older than Sharon. She wore a padded gilet with little primroses all over it, navy capri pants, and a pair of Birkenstocks. She was not tall. She had let her very curly hair go white, and the little corkscrews sprang up all over, like the crinkly, shredded paper in which you might wrap something precious. So precious. The old woman put her feet together and leaned forward at an angle and placed her forehead squarely on the Krakow chakra, where the mystic energy of the world was thought to be both most intense and most accessible to human beings. As the old woman's wrinkled skin touched the white stone, Sharon saw her smile. Some wisdom had been transmitted. A secret text meant for this old woman alone, as her dead fish hand hung by her side, unconnected to anything. Such a woman, Sharon guessed, was far beyond wondering or caring about what she looked like to these Polish people. She was in a different place than Sharon, beyond Sharon, and Sharon could just about see that place. One day, she hoped to reach it, that silent clearing under the trees on the other side of the middle of life. What would it be like to be at home there, as this woman seemed at home, where the light filters through the leaves and there is no longer anything at all to say? Assuming the same position as this wise old woman, Sharon put her feet together. She leaned forward, letting the tears roll, and placed the only part of her face that was dry, her forehead, silently against the stone.